Okay, this is VK3SL, a regular Friday night test transmission on 160 metres, also on 2 metres, and we're going for the stereo effect again tonight. That was all a bit of fun last week, and a couple of people were listening on parallel systems and could hear one channel on 160 and the other on 2 metres. Well, I've got the desk set in stereo mode for the next little while, so we'll continue with that mode of testing, I think, for a bit. Anyhow, varied program. A few things have just sort of come to mind in the last 15-20 minutes, so it's all sort of assembled in an ad hoc fashion as per usual, but that's nothing unusual, and it's probably better that way. So we'll kick off with a stereo test record from 1957. I found quite a few of them here, so they sort of provide some good missions fodder, I suppose. So without any further ado, we'll hear I'll just bring the record cover up to the microphone and identify it. It's the Stereophonic Demonstration and Sound Effects record. We might even get some table tennis, folks. Anyhow, there's a whole range of things, and I'll let you make sense of it. So this is the AF label. Now, who's Audio Fidelity Records? There we go. I think they put out quite a few. There's a number of these online as well, and they're different to this one. So anyhow, this is all a bit of fun. So without any further ado, in the spirit of testing systems, we'll now go into stereo mode and have a listen to the Audio Fidelity. Now, I should mention that it's got a lot of separation. So there, if you're just listening on 160, there may be sort of some of the dialogue may not even be heard at all. You might have a bit of dead air. So that's just the nature of it. But anyhow, we'll give it a go. Off the original LP, probably recorded on an Ampex 300, I guess. We'll hear now the AF Audio Fidelity Stereo Disc Demonstration and Sound Effects record. We'll just listen to one side. This is VK3SL.
Audio Fidelity Records, producers of Stereo Disc, the world's first compatible stereophonic high-fidelity record, presents a study in stereophonic sound. In conventional recording, you hear a combined sound from a single speaker. But now, with a wonderful new miracle of stereo, two sounds originate simultaneously from a single groove, and each sound is fed to a separate speaker. Now, just listen. Hi there, I'm over here this time. That was the Dukes of Dixieland, stereo disc number 1860. Now, I'll walk across the room to my other microphone with my papers and things and to introduce the fabulous Johnny Paleo and his harmonica gang, a group of 6 harmonicas, 3 on one side and 3 on the other. Here's one side. Here's the other. And here they are together. Now, here's a stereo disc recording of bagpipes and drums. Notice that the snare drums are on one side, the bass drums on the other, and now you get a really three-dimensional effect because you can almost see the bagpipes in the center.
About ready. All right, quick, march.
That was from Audio Fidelity's stereo disc 1857, Bagpipes and Drums. As you can hear, the miracle of stereo disc is the perfect reproduction of the instruments, both as to performance and as to placement. Now let's have some fun with a 200-ton musical instrument known as the steam locomotive. Here it is, arriving and departing on Audio Fidelity's stereo disc called Railroad, the sounds of a vanishing era. Now, here's a hungry fellow at the Bronx Zoo. And wild elephants. Here's a splashy time with the happy sea lions. Look out, rattlesnake. And now then, would you be of a mind to hear what it was like in the St. Patrick's Day Parade? You probably know that Leon Berry records exclusively for Audio Fidelity. But did you know that he built a giant Wurlitzer theater pipe organ right into the cellar of his own house? Here's an excerpt from his album 3 on stereo disc. Now, how about Lionel Hampton on drums and that fine clarinet on the other speaker? Anybody for ping pong? Anybody for ping pong? Yes, sir, you certainly are there with Audio Fidelity's stereo disc. And now here is Audio Fidelity's famous Banda Taurina playing a Sousa March on stereo disc.
Well, every stereo test record has to have a train and has to have a ping pong game in the middle of it there. So yes, that was the AF Audio Fidelity demonstration record. Very lame, if I may say so. That all of that as animal noises sort of well, it reminded me of our dinner time. Not that dissimilar. Yeah, so we'll save a few of those up for these test missions now that we can do stereo, and in time hopefully I'll get a higher fidelity 2-meter rig and we'll make something work with a bit more evenness between the channels. Interesting patterns, at least. When the lines were roaring, I was looking at the SDR, and yes, it's all very very interesting. All right, well, I think we should probably move into a different zone. Gosh, that fan's noisy behind. I suppose it is pretty balmy, isn't it, this evening? Okay, well, I think I've got a couple of 78s lined up, and we'll let that take us on a journey. And in fact, I've got Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians, one of my favourites. I really like this record, but it's just in rather bad condition, like all the 78s here. Everything's worn. Everything's been purchased for next to nothing because they're all in bad condition. So what I'll do is I'll cue that up and we'll see what happens. I haven't got the other thing going, so we'll just let this fade in. VK3SL, this is a test.
When the night is calm and peaceful, loving hearts are all in tune. There's two lonesome people in the whole wide world, that's me and the man in the moon. When the little birds are nesting and I listen to them croon, there's two lonesome people in the whole wide world, that's me and the man in the moon. Just before I'm counting sheep, through my window he comes to peep, and with each other we're sympathizing, looking at the happy sweethearts while they sit around and spoon. There's two lonesome people in the whole wide world, that's me and the man in the moon.
Yeah, Me and the Man in the Moon. That's the Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians. I think it was recorded in 1929. Yeah, so that's a real 78. It's one of my faves. I really like that song. Don't know why, but it's just sort of got a nice melodic shape. I think that's what it is. Okay, we'll have another one, another 78 now. This time we'll hear the Rhythmic 8. And who's in the Rhythmic 8? I think it's got Sylvester Ahola on this one. Bert Furman. Is that right, Chris? Rhythmic 8, Bert Furman? I think so. Anyhow, we'll have a listen to Adagio Biego. And yeah, we'll see what you make of this. VK3SL, yeah, testing here on 160 metres and 2 metres and streaming service as well. Okay, yep, just stop that in time. That was the Rhythmic 8 and Adagio Briego from, about 1928-29. And it featured solos by who's the trumpet player again? It's Sylvester Ohola, yes, Huli Ohola, and also I think on saxophone is Pearly Breed on that record. Pretty hot record actually. There's it's a nice sort of half valving with the trumpet solo there. Sax solo wasn't too bad either. So nice little feature record from the Rhythmic 8. Okay, well, we'll zip across to a different turntable now and have a listen to the Arcadians. So the Arcadians, I quite like this record because it's got a cinema organ in it, so nicely thickly textured recording. So we'll have a listen to the Arcadians, and I don't know what cinema it was recorded in, but it's certainly you can hear the effect of the cinema organ there adding to the flavour. So I think it's called My Bella Rosa, and it's on a Zonophone, and it's over here. VK3SL. I'm testing on 160, 2 meters, and the streaming service. Was Mia Bella Rosa for the Arcadians, recorded on Zonophone in 1929. That's all the information I've got. I don't know where it was recorded, and I don't know much about the band. It could be a pseudonym, but yeah, it's great to hear that swinging theatre organ, the big Wurlitzer in the background there. Came across quite well. Now, I thought it'd be fun to do a bit of retrospective on Bill Challis, who's the arranger, who's sort of the soul of the Whiteman Orchestra, really, because in the Whiteman's great period in the from about 1926 to 29:30, the band was a particularly vibrant ensemble, and a lot of that was due to the arrangements of Bill Challis. Now, Bill Challis had quite a long tenure with the band, and he had a background with the Gene Goldkit Orchestra, and he worked as a freelance before that and also after that. And interestingly enough, there is a interview with him online much later on, and he talks about his association with Goldkit and then Whiteman and some of the musicians. It's a bit sort of, unless you know about the band, it can get a little bit sort of, it's a bit specific to musicians and people who may not be known to the listener, but there's a general flavour which is quite fascinating, although he's reading it off a script. So I thought it was worth playing. It goes for about 10-15 minutes, and in the background what I might try and do is put some of Bill Challis's arrangements. We've been playing them for weeks on this test transmission. We've been playing heaps of his arrangements. He was sort of Whiteman's number one arranger. He was on a huge salary, so no one else would poach him. And he was gifted, very gifted musically. He understood the musicians very well. He was a saxophone player and a pianist himself, and although he didn't play with the band, he had a very strong understanding of their strengths and their virtues, and he was able to exploit them really successfully. So that's what he's responsible for, that Whiteman sound. He did some really interesting things that I find his arrangements constantly fascinating. They're never typecast. They're very inquisitive, and he uses voicing in a very effective way. Things like violin writing. The Whiteman had a small bevy of violins, a small group of fiddle players. It's always horrible trying to make fiddle players sound relevant in an ensemble. It's just, unless you've got a huge body of strings, like in a symphony orchestra, violins can sound really weedy. And he succeeded by using really clever voicing and instrument matching to make the fiddles and the Whiteman band sound good. And he also understood a lot about balance. I think he was sort of Whiteman's right hand man. And so look, maybe we'll start off with this, because Mr. Challis began his sort of higher. His more celebrated arranging when he joined the Goldkit Orchestra in 1926, and then you might be aware that Whiteman effectively bought the entire Goldkit band, the theatre band, and then morphed them into his own ensemble. So I think I played this before, but we'll have another listen to Sunday, which is a song a very big hit that Goldkit had in the mid-20s, 1926 in fact, and it features solos by Bix Beiderbecke, Bill Rank and Eddie Lang and Don Murray, and I think it's got the Keller sisters and Lynch who do the, I don't know who Lynch was, but he's there doing the vocals with them. And but this is an early arrangement of Mr. Challis. This is one of his pioneering efforts, I suppose, but very effective. And then we'll sort of move on to the interview and perhaps play a couple of Whiteman tracks as well. So let's have a listen to Sunday. Gene Goldkit and his orchestra, the Greythorn Theatre Orchestra, I think it was called, and Sunday. Yeah, we heard Gene Goldkett's orchestra. He's Greystone Ballroom Orchestra from 1926, October 1926, and featured Bix, Bill Rankin, Eddie Lang, Don Murray, and others. Steve Brown, I think, the bass, and I think Chauncey Morehouse is on drums on that recording as well. Yeah, so that's an early arrangement of Bill Chalice, and when Gene Goldkett ran into financial troubles, he wasn't able to keep his orchestra afloat, and Whiteman came in at that point, and as I mentioned before, he sort of bought nearly the entire band, and then that became the Whiteman Orchestra with, it became the heart of the Whiteman Orchestra in that period between 1926 or late 26, early 27, and 1930, after the King of Jazz. So yes, Mr. Chalice was the chief arranger. Now, what I thought would be interesting would be to have a listen to this interview with him in 1969. And he does mention Bix quite a bit. He would have probably known Bix better than a lot of people because he actually did Bix's arrangements. Bix couldn't read, he could barely read music. And his own works in the dark, Candlelights and A Mist, those great piano compositions, he only just played them from memory, but didn't have the skills to write them down. So it was Chalice who actually took the trouble to do that. So it's interesting, he does mention that, and he mentions quite a few members of the band. So anyhow, if you do get a little bit bored with it all, have a listen to the background music. I'll try and find a reasonable balance, compressors notwithstanding, and see how this goes. Because I've got two laptops now, I can actually have one with different musical content. So we'll see how this all travels. So let's have a listen. I'll start off with just a few of Mr. Prozoot's. There's a whole set of his arrangements. We did play this a few weeks ago, but I'll let that sort of start off, and then I'll fade in this interview with Bill Chalice himself. The interesting compilation of interviews of surviving members of the Goldkett Band in 1969, and this segment is with Chalice himself. So this is VK3SL. Test transmission, of course. There's nothing to do with entertainment whatsoever. We're just testing our ears and making sure that we can hear these voices from the past with some authority.
Well, I'm glad to be over here tonight. I haven't seen Doc to talk with for a long, long time. Doc and Norma. And it's very pleasant visiting with them. It was nice to see Chauncey, and it was very nice to see Bill, hear about his trip. Oh, he said that before. Who I am. I'm Bill Chalice. I was the arranger for this outfit. And I don't get to see too many of these guys anymore. Now I'll tell you how I got started in this thing. I had a band at Bucknell, and I started making arrangements for the band. For the full 4 years I was there, I got a little experience that way. After I got out, I played with some little band from Williamsport, and at one time we were in the vicinity of Detroit, in Toledo, to be exact. And I wanted to go up to Detroit to hear the Greystone Band. I had heard so much about it, and I knew that that some of the boys that I played with before were there playing. In the Scranton Sirens Orchestra, that's right. So, when I got up there to hear them, there was Russ Morgan, Fuzzy Farrar, Itzy Riskin, and Jimmy Dorsey, I think that was all that I played with. So they put in a big plug with Charlie Horvath, the manager, for me to make some arrangements. And he gave me a couple to do. So I wound up with an arrangement to do, which wound up with Owen Bartlett at the book. I never heard much more about it. However, the Greystone Band went on the road that fall, and they came through my hometown. And I talked to Ray Ludwig, and he suggested I make an arrangement of Babyface, which I did. And I think, let's see, he told me to make one of Blue Room, which I did. And then shortly after that, I got a telephone call from Horvath, who was up in Southborough. The band was up there, and he told me to bring all my instruments up. So when I got there, I heard my arrangements played, but played. I asked Charlie if he wanted me to play, and he said, saxophone players are a dime a dozen, and we need arrangements. Why don't you make some more? So he made me an arranger right then and put me on a salary. So now I find myself with a great band that has great ideas and great soloists. I can't help make good arrangements for this outfit. The records made by our band were not really representative of its greatness. At that time, we were described by the company as non-commercial. Actually, the band was way ahead of its time. Later on, when the Victor Company let us do as we wished, we turned out a few sparklers, such as Sunday, My Pretty Girl, Clementine, and others. I picked up a lot from the band's ensemble playing, working out courses with Bix Beiderbecke and Frank Trombar, and getting excellent suggestions from the rest of the band. I owe that outfit a lot. That night in Atlantic City, during the $1 Million Pier engagement, when Jimmy Dorsey brought Whiteman, with whom he and Tommy were then playing, Henry Buzzy, Matty Malnick, Bing Crosby, and others of his band down from a Philadelphia theater engagement to hear our band, that was another lucky break for me. The news that the Goldcat Band was about to disband had got around, and I suppose a little scouting was in order. Whiteman said he'd have no part of vulturing, but that the guys he'd like to have with him could feel free to have a fling at New York Radio and Recording and join him later if and when they wished. I was one of them, and I chose to join him as soon as he'd have me. I got starry-eyed when I thought of those fiddles, 8 reed men, 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, and an arranging staff headed by Ferdy Grofey, whose work I had admired from a way back. Also, all those recordings and choice tunes. Besides recording, the band schedule, already begun, would include a 2 or 3 year theater tour, a concert tour, a European tour, and a Hollywood moving picture, if all I heard were true. I joined the following month, in September, at the New York Paramount. As it was set up for me, I was to go along on the theater tour for 10 weeks, until Chicago, where we'd record, to observe, listen, do whatever arranging I could under the circumstances, and get acquainted with the guys. A small pedal organ they carried with the baggage would be deposited in my hotel room in each city. I floated out of New York. Jimmy Dorsey and I were roommates from the beginning. Charlie Margulis came into the band about 2 weeks out. Then followed Steve Brown. Steve didn't get any happier trying to find a place in all that manuscript, and there would be no dance engagements for some time. But he was great when the occasion arose. Then a few weeks later in Indianapolis, Bix and Tram joined. I first met Hoagie Carmichael in Indianapolis. Whiteman and Jimmy brought him to the hotel to play over his Washboard Blues, which he was to record with us. During these next few months, I thought the band sound hit a peak at the recording sessions. It had a good ensemble, a good spirit, the soloists were good, and it made some good records. However, 4 and 5 shows a day isn't the type of musical diet on which to maintain enthusiasm. Tommy gave his notice in Chicago, and we were fortunate to get Bill Rank as a replacement. Steve Brown and Jimmy gave theirs not long after, and Min Liebrook and Izzy Friedman replaced them. Whiteman and Jack Robbins were partners in a publishing venture called Whiteman Publications and formed to publish compositions performed by the Whiteman Orchestra. Malik and Frank Signorelli had composed a few which were recorded, also Ferdy, Lou Alder, and others. Now Robbins was around pressing Bix to add a broad strain to his In a Mist, like the Rhapsody in Blue. Bix liked the idea and came up with it like it is now. The notation took us a little time. Later on, I notated Candlelights, Flashes, and In the Dark for him. I thought they were great. I can't remember anything of his that wasn't. Bix was very interested in composing. At one time in New York, when we were working on In the Dark, he told me he'd like to leave something behind so he'd be remembered. After he died, I took down his Davenport Blues from an old Wolverines record. When I returned from the road trip and settled in New York, Ferdy and I became good friends. When I told him I felt I was slower than Shinola and perhaps some instruction would help, he took me to Pietro Floridia, his teacher, and I began to study. As I went along, I felt I was being helped considerably, but I never did get to that fast man plateau, or I could make an arrangement in the subway on the way home. Whiteman switched his recording affiliation to Columbia Records, and when the band returned to New York, he closed out his Victor tenure with a batch of about 50 recordings made at the old Laderkrantz Hall studio. The whole band seemed to enjoy these sessions, and I got to use Bix in a lot of my arrangements. I still think he has had no peer in his field. The concert trip began at Carnegie Hall, and sometime later, Bix returned to New York, ill. He spent a few days in a hospital in Astoria, then went home to Davenport to recuperate. He was not away long, but sometime later, there was a repetition. When he returned to New York the second time, he waited around to rejoin, but it never materialized, and he was quite disappointed. During the time the band was on the coast making the King of Jazz picture, I got a phone call one afternoon from Fletcher Henderson. His band was rehearsing in Vincent Youmans' production Great Day, and he asked if I would like to make some arrangements for Mr. Youmans, and if so, would I come right along to the theater and meet him. It was a nice experience. We made an appointment at his office, and I got Whiteman's permission to do the work. A tune called More Than You Know. Billy Rose was one of its lyric writers. Marion Harris was to sing it. He played it for me several times exactly as he wanted it orchestrated, whistling the melody as he played. Then he had her sing it till she was tired. Then he gave me a manuscript copy of what he had just played to take home. Understanding? This guy owned it. He liked the orchestration, and we got together several times after that. I was grateful to Fletch. When the King of Jazz picture opened at the Roxy Theater in the spring of 1930 with the stage appearance of Paul Whiteman and his orchestra, with George Gershwin at the piano playing the Rhapsody in Blue, it was as if people were saying, "So what?" After 1 week, the band took a forced vacation and was promptly cut down to 16 men. Among those lopped off with Joe Venuti, Eddie Lang, Lenny Hayton, and others was yours truly. I freelanced after that. For several years, I made arrangements and rehearsed them for the Casa Loma Orchestra when it was building. I made arrangements for Fletcher when he was at Connie's Inn in Harlem. In radio, I worked for Don Voorhees when he played for Russ Colombo and John Charles Thomas. I notated and arranged for Willard Robeson and his Deep River Orchestra in radio. And I did a lot of work for Nat Shilkret over a period of years. I made orchestrations for Billy Rose when he had his nightclubs and shows. I worked for Dick Himber when he had the Studebaker Champions. I worked for Victor Young, Frank Black, Gus Henshin, Bobby Dolan, Mark Warno, Lenny Hayton on the first Lucky Strike hit parade. Through Charlie Margulis, I made orchestrations for Kate Smith for about 3 years. For my first assignment, Jack Miller, the leader of the orchestra, came to my house and handed me a record. It was one of Russ Morgan's. I looked at him. He said, "Take it off, like it is, note for note." When I saw him after the show, I got, "Fine arrangement, Bill." I was in solid. I enjoyed a 6-month stint with Artie Shaw before he went into the Navy. One day I ran into Frank O'Keefe in front of the RCA building at Radio City, and he hired me for the Glenn Gray Orchestra, F.C. O'Keefe's silent partner. It used to be the Casa Loma Orchestra. I was hired to make arrangements, rehearse the band, and roughly have some kind of charge of the music and sort out the 4 Fs. While I was with them, I got to make an album with Bobby Hackett for Milt Gabler at Coral. For over 20 years, I have lived in Massapequa at 151 Dartmouth Road. I do an occasional bit at music, work in my garden, and take care of my house. The date is Friday, December 13th, 1968.
Hey, Fred. Hello, this is Fred. They called me Fuzzy when I was in Detroit with the Gold Cat outfit. And I'm in the company of 2 of my old friends here.
Today is the day, some sweet someone's coming this way. Some sweet someone's coming to say hello, hello, hi-ho. Come, let's hop a cab, let's get any old thing we can grab. Let's all meet her, there's no one sweeter I know. But da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You can rave and shout about your gals in town. Wait till you see that out-of-town gal of mine, of mine. Sweeter than sweet Mary Brown. Wait till you see that out-of-town gal of mine. Right now you think I'm not a smarty, but wait and hesitate until you see that certain party. Imagine Venus dressed in a blue gingham gown. Wait till you see that out-of-town gal of mine.
Right, so we just heard a selection of Paul Whiteman's orchestra from 1928, some of his Potato Head Columbia records, and on top of that, an interview, or at least a reminiscence of Bill Challis, who was the Whiteman arranger, and he's really brought to he. I'll sort of fade this out. Wait a minute. One memento, please, as I can't multitask when I've got Gold Cat band members screaming in my ear. Yes. So what happened to me? Mr. Challis, I think, was the soul of the Whiteman Orchestra. He knew the musicians exceptionally well, and I think you get a sense of his commitment and his musical understanding from the way he was speaking. And I think that really individual sound and the adventurous spirit of the arrangements was very largely to do with Challis. And you might be aware that he actually orchestrated a lot of Bix's solos as well, which is no mean feat. And they were often, a lot of the brass section write-outs in Whiteman's band were actually glorified Bix breaks, which were sort of adapted, I suppose. Yeah, I thought I'd put another one on. We'll find another one on the list here. Navigating to laptops. Now, here we go. This is Sugar. This is one of the Victors, so just before we moved to Columbia, and this is one of Bill Challis's arrangement with the Whiteman Orchestra in its full glory, and includes a great big solo, actually, but he's playing behind the saxophone. I think it's Trumbar or... I think it might be Chester Hazlitt, but anyhow, we'll have a listen to Sugar, and this is VK3SL. Trying to multitask here, I still haven't quite got the hang of this. Get there eventually. Wait a minute, I'm going to have to fade up over here as well. This is a little bit of a reach around. All right, let's go with it now. Sugar, VK3SL, and no entertainment intended. Okay, we heard Sugar with Paul Whiteman and his orchestra, recorded in 1928. And, celebrating the exploits of Mr. Chalice, the Whiteman arranger. I wonder if he lived to hear the reincarnation of those arrangements with the new Paul Whiteman Orchestra. Dick Soderholder in the 1970s in London formed a scratch group of session players to recreate the Whiteman sound. They found all of these original arrangements and attempted to recreate Paul Whiteman's music. So it was an interesting endeavour. In fact, I think when I first started doing my missions, I played a few of those recordings and compared them back to back. It does make interesting listening. It just doesn't sound the same. Maybe I've just been listening to these 1920s records for too long. But there's a lot of subtlety which is revealed at the same time. So I wonder if Chalice did get to hear those. He probably did. He lived until 1994. And he lived to a great age, because I think he was born about 1898 or something. So, yes, interesting figure. I'd love to hear some of his arrangements in the 30s and 40s, his later material. It'll take a bit of sifting to find them, but there's a few leads in that interview, and I'm sure they can be teased out. But I'd like to hear how he evolved as an arranger. So that could be an interesting little journey. So maybe we'll keep this theme open. All right, so let's see what's next on the list here. We better change tack, because I had a few classical things lined up as well. Had some more Paul Whiteman, but I think we'll leave that till next week. Just a very small OTR segment. I found a bit of the Nixa show from 3DB, but it has the 3DB closure on it, which is quite interesting to hear. So just a short offering from the radio archives, but we'll have a listen to this and see what you make of it. So this is VK3SL, testing as per usual, Friday nights. Been doing this for quite some time. I think we'll be close to 2 years soon. But it's one of those crazy indulgences that seems to consume me. But anyhow, let's have a listen to 3DB, the Nixa show.
And that completes the presentation of Ponchielli's La Gioconda in the Nixa hour. The complete opera is now available on 4 12-inch Nixa long-playing recordings. We trust that you've enjoyed this outstanding series of programs arranged for the connoisseur and presented by the makers of Nixa long-playing recordings, the finest in Australia. 3DB Melbourne and 3LK Central Victoria are the head rule stations. 10:30, and after the playing of the national anthem, these stations will close down to recommence transmission at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, when Danny Webb will be at the microphone. This is Morris Callard saying good night, everyone. Good night.
That's it. Now, I do like the way they played the gongs on that. They did something very fluent with their gongs. They had 4, not 3, and I could hear a little a signature sound there, 3dB signature, using the gongs. So yes, just a little tiny excerpt from the vaults, and Nixa records are sort of not as well. They're harder to find, and maybe I could create my own little Nixa show at some point, play some of the early LPs. But I'd say that would be from the mid-1950s. All right, so keeping things moving. Let's see what's next. And, all right. Well, I don't know what to play next. I sort of had a few things in mind, but I don't know quite what journey to take people on or to where to go. Look, I tell you what I might do. I've got queued up, there's been a recording of Joseph Hoffman's come up, and he's probably the pianist that I find the most interesting to listen to, and he's certainly beyond genius, really. I think people are probably sick of me waxing lyrical about Joseph Hoffman, but there's a recording of his Moonlight Sonata from a live performance in 1936. It's interesting, he plays a few chords which leads into it. They used to link pieces harmonically in those days. Anyhow, you'll hear I'll just play the first movement of Moonlight as a little bit of a breaker, and you'll hear this extraordinary way which he creates rubato, and but the music never sounds stolified or disjointed. It's just got this amazing sense of flow, but rubato is achieved by just the most subtle means of using different speeds with different hands, and borrowing from some parts of the phrase and adding to others. So you could almost put a metronome on it in a broader sense, but within those longer lines there's a lot of space. It's incredible, really, what happens here. So the listener may enjoy this. A recording of Joseph Hoffman from 1936 live, and this is probably one of the most amazing things I've heard. But yeah, I say that a lot, don't I? VK3SL, testing. leave the rest to another time. An extraordinary performance by Mr. H. And yeah, there's just so much happening in that performance. It's just what an architectural concept. It just never sounds like it's affected. It's a beautiful sense of natural inner rhythm, I suppose it is. But there's something very organic about Mr. H and his manner of playing, something that certainly appeals to me. And I saw that came up on a list and I thought, oh, I'll have to listen to it again. And of course it has to go on the playlist. So yeah, I was pleased to play that again. I'd love to play the whole thing sometime. And the other movements are just as great. All right, so what's next? Oh yeah, since we're sort of doing all the stereo tests at the moment, I can refer people to a very early example. I think it's one of Blomline's tests from 1932. Now, I don't think this is an accidental stereo recording. I think it's an experimental one. Yes, it is, from 1932 with the Philadelphia Orchestra of Stokowski, and he plays the Scriabin's Poem of Ecstasy. He plays a bit of it anyhow. So we'll have a listen. It goes for about 5 minutes. And so if you're able to listen on FM, listen to one ear with FM and the other on 160, if it suits your purpose, this could be an interesting one to try out. It's pretty fine for 1932 as well, so I think it's one of those early transcriptions. So we'll give this a whirl and we'll have a listen to Leopold Stokowski. And yes, early stereo, probably one of the very first considered stereo recordings made. I think there are a few accidental stereo recordings made before that, but this is quite special. So now let's have to take off the mono Kenobi and cue this up and we'll have a listen. It says excerpts from Scriabin's Poem of Fire. It's Poem of Fire, not Ecstasy. Philadelphia Orchestra experimental stereo recording from 1932, it says. So is this a bit of a preamble here on the screen as the thing loads up? And it's slowly getting there. Or is it? Maybe not. Maybe it needs another push. Come on. Oh, there we go. Certainly did go there. Let's... Hello. Yeah, I've got a bit of a problem with the monitoring here. All right, let's give it another go. VK3SL, not testing. Testing. Okay, that's just an excerpt from the work. I'll just see if there's any more. Oh yeah, there's another section here. We'll keep going. It's quite impressive. I've just been listening to it in stereo. So well worth the effort. We'll keep going. This is The Palm of Fire, with Leopold Stokowski conducting the music of Scriabin. And that's it, folks. We just heard Leopold Stokowski conducting the music of Scriabin from 1932. It sounded very impressive. I have to say, the Bell Labs had it all worked out with their dual-headed pickup, and in 1932 it was all go. So I suppose it just took another 20 years to sort of mock it all up and make it commercially viable. Well, at least get the publicity machine behind them. But what a fascinating early experiment in stereo that was. Incredible. Now, I think Mr. Blumlein did some early binaural recordings as well. It'd be interesting to find out more about those. That was a bit of a hobby of mine decades ago. I used to have in-ear microphones, and I used to walk around and get all of the spatial effects from different situations, things like the Steam Fair and public events. And you'd get these amazing ambience with all of the spatial cues using binaural microphones. And I used to use a binaural head to record my concerts with. So, yes, I was quite into binaural sound, and I know that there's a very strong movement online of people who are really into it. But it's something I wouldn't mind revisiting. I actually did have a look and see if I could find my binaural mics the other day, and some of them I've lost. There's a couple of sets I still have, but the ones that I mainly used seem to have disappeared. So I might have to save up and make another order for some, because with those little data recorders, it's never been easier to do this sort of thing. Anyhow, digressing a little bit, but yes, certainly stereo is fun. And we should continue these tests on 160 and 2 metres in stereo, find some more test records, and particularly the early stuff. It's quite interesting. And of course the accidental stereo records are another theme worth exploring. Alrighty, well, that was a great performance. It's funny, hearing it in stereo, you do listen more deeply, I think. And he's really getting some interesting ideas out of the Philadelphia Orchestra. I know that was his orchestra and they knew him very well. He was an unusual, enigmatic character, Mr. Stokowski. Some people thought he was a complete shark and actually just didn't have any idea. And I just think he had a lot of trouble expressing himself. And he didn't know, he knew what he wanted, but he just wasn't able to explain a lot of things, and people didn't take him that seriously. But certainly his recordings testify to an incredible musical vision. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, so that was, I don't know who the pianists are on that recording, but anyhow, it was good to hear. Alrighty, now we heard some. Oh yeah, I just thought last week we had a bit of an excursion to some world music, and I was thinking about some of our travels I travelled quite a bit in Eastern Europe and did a lot of walking in Eastern Europe, heard music from different areas, and I recorded quite a bit, but I also developed a real fascination for music of the East, and particularly Moldova and Romania, and spent quite a bit of time in the Moldovan city of Iași. And I think people have heard my tale about getting the Ionescu cello sonata and learning it. I've learned it recently, but kept it for a long time. But I've always loved that music, and I find that sort of gypsy-inspired music to be particularly interesting. So, well, we'll have a listen to something Balkan, I think, today for a little bit, and then maybe some Romanian stuff after that. Yeah, we'll have a listen to Tarif D Hadouks again. We heard that band last week. They're sort of the most renowned Eastern European band playing really high-octane Romanian and Eastern European music. So look, let's see if I can get the cue right. Where is the mouse? Yeah, so this is some Balkan gypsy music. Goes for ages, so I'll just play a little bit of it, and then we'll sort of let this morph into something else. So I'm VK3SL, it's a test transmission, and we're now heading over to the Balkans. In stereo, of course.
Măi, vai verde, poica malu, vai verde, poica malu, Ceaușescu, criminalul ăla ne-a mâncat amalul, ăla ne-a mâncat amalul. Ceaușescu, Nicolae, de-al țara în băpaie, să mireasă toată lumea, luase hrana și căldura și la urmă și ilumina și la urmă și măi, când era ploaie și vânt, când era ploaie și vânt, el le scotea la mătini și le scotea de luzină, fără țigări, fără pâine, fără țigări, fără pâine. Măi, păi de pui, în decembrie 22 a venit vremea înapoi, să trăim, frate, și noi. Și-o foiță foilată, să trăim în libertate, ca să trăim în libertate. Vai verde-o viorea, acolo în Timișoara, mareșală căierea. Ia studenții ce plăceam, rodiți în mână luam, măi, și păstrez, frate, măi, ia studenții ce făceam, rodiți în mână lua și păstrez, frate, pleca. La comitet ajungea și din gură că-i striga, jos cu dictatoria, măi. Chioriștii ce făcea, tulurile scotea și popor, frate, trăgea și cu apă că-i stropea, cu apă nu reușea. Tancurile scotea și popor, frate, trăgea, în spitale că-i băga, măi, în spitale buzăniți și de cartuși și zbudiți. Măi, ia studenții ce făcea, ia studenții ce făcea la mașină să suia, la București că pleca. Și din gură că-i striga, săriți, fraților români, ca să scăpăm de păgâni. Iar românii ce făcea, cu ei, frate, că pleca și la Banat ajungea. Și din gură că-i striga, jos cu dictatoria, Ceaușescu cauzea, mă, Ceaușescu cauzea. Iar în bocul ce făcea, un elicopter că-i chema, pe Ceaușescu că lua și cu el să te fugea. Poliția ce făcea, după el că se lua, într-un tac să te punea, măi. La București la ducea, într-o vodaie că-l punea. Și ce te-a dat judeca, de bine ținea de-așa, ai mâncat România, ai mâncat România.
Well, I could just go all night listening to this stuff. It's the most amazing video clip. The guy who just sang then and using the little bit of string to play his violin with, and it's like on a continuous loop. Anyhow, this fellow looks like about 200 years old. He's got no teeth. They're pretty... well, I think it's actually quite a commercial band, but the way it's presented, he looks like he's just come out of the gutter. But I do recall in Yash hearing street musicians just like this, playing to a very high level, and it's just so compelling to watch and listen to. I find it magnetising. It's sort of folk music in its rawest sense. And there's something very earthy about this Moravian, or in this case Balkan music. Fantastic. And one of our correspondents sent me a link to World Music's site, the channel, which I will certainly enjoy. Yeah, wow, that is just incredible. So anyone's interested, I can supply a link to this. It goes for about 50 minutes, and it's a live performance, and they're in an old car park. It's a black and white film, and they sort of just go into the car park and play, essentially. Well, it's not a car park, it's like a factory, I think. But I'd love to know the meaning behind the songs and get a bit of a bit more background to this. I've had CDs of this group, but I've never seen footage of them playing. But as I said, that guy looks like he's about 200 years old. He's probably about 50. Yeah, he's another really great track. Actually, this is the one I played last week. And it goes on and on and on. It's just like one huge presentation. Okay, well, what I might do is I might fade that one and just put on something from a similar part of the world, but it's a CD I picked up from some street musicians who I met up with in Prague. We lived in Prague twice. We lived there for 6 months at one point, and I think about 3 months another time. So we had quite a bit to do with music in that, and we heard a lot of the street musicians play in Prague. These guys are amazing. It's a small sort of scratch group, and they had a residency on the Charles Bridge, and or near the Charles Bridge, and we used to go and hear them play, and I ended up getting a CD from them. Haven't listened to it for well over a decade, but I pulled it out tonight, so have a bit of a sample. So I'll just put a couple of tracks from this on. This is a Moravian folk tune, and I haven't even got the details here. It's all in Moravian. It won't mean anything. No, I'm not even going to try and say it. So anyhow, have a listen to this. It's something of a very interesting rhythmic displacement in this piece, by the way. I'm VK3SL, and we're sampling some folk music from Eastern Europe, gypsy folk music.
Morava, jako je slezko, dala bych ti huběnku, až vidno plesko, ale že je Morava maučka, ošidila dcerečka synečka, ale že je Morava maučka, ošidila dcerečka synečka. Kdyby byla Morava, jako je Vídeň, dala bych ti huběnek na celý týden, ale že je Morava maučka, ošidila dcerečka synečka, ale že je Morava maučka, ošidila dcerečka synečka. Byla Morava jako jsou Čechy, dala bych ti huběnek na plné měchy, ale že je Morava maučka, ošidila dcerečka synečka, ale že je Morava maučka, ošidila dcerečka synečka.
Okay, that was some Moravian folk dance, and played by, I can't even say, the Prague Novelty Orchestra, I think it translates to. But pretty dynamic group. They were wonderful to watch. They just had incredible presence and phenomenal energy and musical nous. It was fabulous. Right, we'll zip ahead. There's another one on this which I think would come across pretty well. So I'll jump ahead to track 23 and we'll make this one of our last offerings, I think. That one queue up. Right, this is VK3SL test transmission and we're listening to this case Český Pníka, which I don't know, it means check something. It's very folkish anyhow. Okay, that wasn't the one. That wasn't the one. Maybe in track 22. Let's see. Take 2. No, it wasn't that one either. Interesting. Alright, I'll keep going until I find it. Here we go, try this one. No. They're all very pretty, they're great pieces, but there's one which had a real sort of edge to it, which I liked. We'll go back another couple. Might have to go. Let's see. No, it's not that one. Try 17. This might be it.
Ziemkuje tam we mlinie, koto klapę ziemkuje tam ma panenka rozmila, ziemkuje tam we mlinie. Ale stało se, że szedł tam we picie, měl na stranu klouček, jenom tak pro parádu přišel tam ve piče. Měl na stranu klouček, dal si nalejt má zpíva a potom si zaspíval kolínečku kolíne. Dal si nalejt má zpíva a potom si zaspíval kolínečku kolíne.
Yeah, I don't know if that was the track I was intending. I can't seem to find it, but I'll seek it out for another time. But it's interesting to hear that music's got a much softer edge. It hasn't got that sort of acrid, almost acerbic feel that we heard on the with the Balkan music. Very different atmosphere, but similar part of the world. So I reckon at that point I'm going to start folding up, I think. I'll stand by on 2 meters after the last offering, and then we'll see if there's anybody around. But thanks for listening through, and it's been a bit of fun revisiting all this folk music for sure. Okay, well, we'll finish with something completely different, but it's with a different type of gypsy theme. And we'll let this one ride out. So, wishing everyone a very good week. I should be around next week, and we'll see what happens. See what happens next. VK3SL. Fading in.
Came over the hill, down to the valley so shady. He whistled and he sang till the green woods rang, and he won the heart of a lady. Ah-dee-doo, ah-dee-doo, da-dee, ah-dee-doo, ah-dee-day. He whistled and he sang till the green woods rang, and he won the heart of a lady. She left her father's castle gates, she left her own fond lover, she left her servants and her estate to follow the gypsy rover. Ah-dee-doo, ah-dee-doo, da-dee, ah-dee-doo, ah-dee-day. He whistled and he sang till the green woods rang, and he won the heart of a lady. He is no gypsy, my father, she said, but lord of these lands over. With him I'll stay till my dying day, and follow the gypsy rover. Ah-dee-doo, ah-dee-doo, da-dee, ah-dee-doo, ah-dee-day. He whistled and he sang till the green woods rang, and he won the heart of a lady. The whistling gypsy came over the hill, down to the valley so shady. He whistled and he sang till the green woods rang, and he won the heart of a lady. Ah-dee-doo, ah-dee-doo, da-dee, ah-dee-doo, ah-dee-day. He whistled and he sang till the green woods rang, and he won the